There are a lot of exciting things going on right now in the world of civil engineering. One of them being the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. In this episode of the Civil Engineering CEO, we're going to talk to Aine O'Dwyer, Principal and CEO of Enovate Engineering. And Aine's going to talk about a lot of these things and how their company is dealing with them, but she's also going to talk about one of the things that we should be concerned about with the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. Really something interesting to think about. So before we dive in with Aine, I do want to take a moment to recognize our sponsor for this episode, Big Time.
Oh my God, this is amazing. I love it.
Got it. Wow, Dave, this is amazing. This is really, really cool.
The software is great. I love this program.
These are the real reactions of Big Time customers when they first toured the software. Big Time gives engineering firms the visibility they need to operate more efficiently and maximize profits. From project creation to client payments, Big Time streamlines operations with intuitive budgeting, project management, and invoicing solutions. Schedule your tour of the #1 rated professional services automation software at bigtime.net. Now I'd like to welcome on our guest for today's episode of the Civil Engineering CEO, Aine O'Dwyer. Aine is the Principal and CEO of Enovate Engineering. Aine, welcome to the Civil Engineering CEO.
Thanks for having me, Anthony. It's good to speak with you again.
Yes, Aine was on the Civil Engineering podcast a couple of years ago, and it's been one of our most viewed episodes with over 15,000 views on YouTube. Now, there aren't a lot of civil engineering YouTube superstars on yet, but I think Aine is one.
Well, I don't know. I obviously said something that was very different, so hopefully it went over well.
Yeah, for sure. So maybe you could tell our viewers a little bit about your company, where you're located, what you do, how many offices, employees you have, things of that nature, just to get us going.
Sure. So Enovate, we're an engineering and construction management company. We work in a couple of different markets. Our biggest market by far is transportation and infrastructure, mainly heavy civil infrastructure. And then in addition to that, we have some private clients. We do some renewables focused work. That's been a big push for us over the past year. Our headquarters is in Cranford, New Jersey. We're also in New York City. So we sit in both locations. We're certainly expanding quite a bit, both in terms of services and people, just by nature of the amount of work that's coming in. I know that, we're very quiet for a period of time during COVID, but it's all come back with a bang. So we're currently 25 people, but grown pretty quickly. We should be up to, we hired 4 people in the last week. We'll probably hire another 4 over the next month. So very quickly expanding for a company our size. That's quite a lot of people in a short period of time.
Yeah, for sure. That is a lot of people. So let's talk about that for a minute.
Mm-hmm.
How did you get to where you are today as CEO of the company?
Mm-hmm.
Talk to us about your career journey and how you got into your position.
Sure. So, before Enovate's about 4 years old now. Before I was with Enovate, I worked for the Conti Group for about 10 years. If you're not familiar with Conti, they're well, now it's quite different from when I left, but when I was there, they were a large developer and general contractor. And, that's where I started my career. I started out as a field engineer, project manager, superintendent, mostly working on heavy civil projects. But I moved when I was after about being there for 5 years, I moved into more of a technical role, kind of technical when you think of construction. And ultimately, I ended up running engineering for the company. And that gave me a lot of exposure, not just to local New York, New Jersey projects, but I was traveling internationally. I was working on a lot of development projects, which was new for me. P3 projects, design build projects. So it really kind of broadened my horizon and gave me a lot of exposure than I would have been having if I was just kind of going the traditional, civil engineer route. So that kind of exposure really opened me up to what I like to call the other side of the business, right? How a lot of these projects happen, especially when you get involved with development projects, P3 projects. I've come to realize that everything that happens before A design might have a happen, or, you break ground in construction. That's really the hard work, the political things that need to happen, the financing that needs to happen. And that was really interesting to me. It really opened me up to the business side of civil engineering. So that exposure, I mean, it was amazing. I had some great leadership back when I was at Conti. I was personally given just opportunities that I'm not sure I would have gotten if I was in other places. So it was just fantastic for my career, and I learned so much. But that was the point where I started to feel like, the next natural step for me would be to kind of take that step and go out on my own and, have a company and really run it from a business point of view. And so that's kind of how Enovate came to fruition. That was about 4 years ago. A lot has happened in that 4 years. A lot of us kind of lost 2 years, both personally and professionally due to COVID, but it's been a hell of a journey. I've learned so many lessons of things that I look back now, and I was, I knew nothing of this business of being on the owner side of the business until I came in. I thought I did, but some things you just have to learn by going through them. So it's been a fantastic journey, and I've had some great people around me. The staff that's been here at Enovate has been fantastic through everything. So that's kind of a very shortened version of how I got here.
So are you one of the founders of Enovate, or did you come into the company and quickly assume a leadership position? Tell us about that transition.
Yeah. So I'm technically one of the founders. So when I was at Conti, when I was there, I mentioned that I was running engineering, and it was a group that started with me. And then as, we started to do more back when I was at Conti, when they started to do more kind of engineering development, P3 work, I started to build up a staff around me. And it was at that point where I realized what was happening and I saw the opportunity. So I actually took the few people, the group that I was working with, there was just a couple of us at that point, and we spun away. So I did a buyout and we spun away. So I'm one of the original founders of the company, although I didn't, it started, originally it was part of Conti, and then we spun away when I did the buyout.
Wow, that's really interesting. Good for you. I mean, that's obviously a big risk to take in your career, but it seems like it worked out, and you now are running a fast growing firm. So that's a great thing. And I really commend you for that, taking that risk. So what would your staff say about your management style?
So I think they'd say I'm more hands off. I tend to give people autonomy in what they're working on. I have a couple of what we call within Enovate, we call them business unit leads. And they have a lot of autonomy with kind of the practice that they're working on, that they're focusing on. We communicate a ton, but as far as the day-to-day operations, I try to stay out of that. I recognize that they're very talented at what they do, otherwise they wouldn't be working for us. So I'm hands off, but my standards are very high, I think they'd probably say. So my style is to be hands off, but also like when we communicate, I'm very goal driven. I'm very metrics driven from the point of view of like growth and where I want to take Enovate, not so much the day-to-day metrics. So we're constantly communicating about that. So as I think about it, they're running their projects in the day-to-day, and I'm kind of running the organization and looking at the future and the strategy and what does that mean and what are we doing now, and that needs to be put in place so that it translates to where we want to be in the future.
That's great. It's really interesting because I've interviewed a handful of CEOs so far for this show and many CEOs for the Civil Engineering podcast. And believe it or not, many of them had very similar answers to this question, which is they're hands off, but they like to hold people accountable. And, you mentioned metrics and that you're very goal driven. And so I'm kind of wondering, is the reason that all of you are CEOs is because you do not get too deep into the details, but you still hold people accountable? Or is that just a coincidence? And I do believe that that's a very important aspect of leadership in today's world, because, as we grow up as engineering professionals, we literally live in the details. I mean, when we graduate school by job, that's our definition. And so to be able to make that transition and say, I just can't be in that level anymore of detail, that's something that is not easy for people to do. And I know that firsthand because we help engineers work on those skills through some of our training programs as they make these transitions. But it does seem like if you want to really get into those upper levels of leadership like you have, it's really a critical thing that you have to do to let go of those details.
Yeah, I mean, and it's not easy, right? Engineers just naturally we're very thoughtful and we're very detail oriented. I'm sure all of our spouses will attest to that. We're far too detailed in everything that we do. But it is, if you want to, my experience has been that if you want to excel, you have to pull yourself out of the weeds. You can't be involved with every single aspect because you're just going to get so focused on something that you're missing the big picture. But that being said, the best leaders in our profession are the ones that have come up through that, and they've gotten that experience where, they can be leaders and talk to the people that are in the weeds because they know what they're talking about and they've lived it, right? So it's kind of a balance of, you can't just jump to being in that leadership position to be like, I'm hands off and no details. You kind of have to have that background so that you can manage those people, right? And gain their trust and their respect because you've kind of been in the trenches and you know what you're talking about.
Yeah, for sure. So Aine, obviously over the past few years, there's been a lot of ups and downs going on. We've had COVID, everybody had to kind of adjust and go remote overnight. We have a bunch of infrastructure projects going and some funding coming through. So now we've got a lot more work coming. And again, there's a lot of ups and downs. It's kind of a roller coaster ride these days in the civil engineering industry. So as a leader, how do you prevent yourself from kind of underreacting or overreacting, along this roller coaster ride?
It's a really important thing to be able to do. And I'm by no means, would say I'm an expert at it. I think I'm constantly, reminding myself, but I think if you take a step back and, you are a leader in an organization, or whether it's in civil engineering, another profession, you're a leader on a team, whatever it might be, when things don't go well, or things are down, or something drastic happens, the first thing everyone does is look to you and they see how you react and how you respond. So that's always something that I'm conscious of and I'm thinking about. So a lot of times if things happen, both good and bad, right, I tend to take a step back, and before I respond, before I react, I tend to kind of give it some space and, what is a warranted response here? And it's a good exercise to do, especially when, you get an email where you want to react really quickly and tell the person that they're wrong. And sometimes if you just put some space between that, you'll actually come up with a much better response. And that's a simple example. But, the last 2 years, COVID was tough. But as I look back and reflect on it, first of all, it wasn't as bad as anyone predicted, right, for our business. There was a lot of doomsday predictions at the beginning that I think we all had, and are we all going to have jobs in 6 months? And so none of that came to fruition. The industry has rebounded, and it's as strong as it's been in years. As an employer, it's extremely hard to find good people, which I think is fantastic, right? It's tough as an employer, but it just shows how strong the industry is right now. That there's great people that are being highly sought after. But there was a lot of lessons that we learned, and a lot of lessons that I learned over the past 2 years that there's no way I would have learned them without just going through it. It caused me to, shift how I think about strategy. There was some things within the business, some decisions I made that I might not have been pushed into making them had it not been for, COVID being thrown in our face and forcing us all to really assess and plan and think. So, it was a tough time, but I think it was for myself personally, kind of career wise, I have grown as a leader so much over the past 2 years. And I've spoken to a lot of people that would say the same thing. And within the company, I think we've grown. I did a lot I tried to, and I'm still doing it, trying to communicate a lot with everyone within the company. This is what's going on. Just lay it out there rather than try and sugarcoat things. At least back when, things were a little bit rough at the beginning of COVID. And I found that that's really helped. It's kind of helped us get through this as a company. We've all kind of stuck together, and, we've certainly come out the other side, and certainly come out a lot stronger, and we're busier and we're growing. And so, it's caused a lot of things, I think, both from leadership style, management style, strategy approaches. A lot of good came out of COVID. And look, it's still going on, right? There's still a lot of things that we need to be aware of. We're certainly not out of the woodwork, but I think I think we've kind of business wise learned how to adapt to it.
For sure. And I remember from the last time we spoke, we had a short conversation about meditation. You had mentioned that it was something that you engage in, and you had actually turned me on to the Waking Up app, which is great. And I've been using it ever since.
Yeah, it's a very, very helpful app.
And I can only imagine, and I know from my own experience, that doing that is very helpful when you get into some stressful times. I know for me, one of the things that's allowed me to slow things down in the moment is meditation.
Yeah.
Whereas I couldn't do that as well when I wasn't practicing meditation, because my mind was kind of racing. And in an industry like this, that can really happen a lot.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I still practice. I still try and meditate every morning. I've started to do more breathing exercises too. I find that helps. There's different techniques that you'll see out there, in if there's a high stress situation, right? One of the things, if you're going through something stressful, right? So one of the worst things you can do is add more stress to it, right? So you should probably avoid, maybe don't watch thrillers, or don't see people you don't really like, right? If you're in that mental space. But then there's some things that help us. Something as simple as box 4 breathing. Breathe in for 4 seconds, hold it for 4 seconds, breathe out for 4 seconds, hold it again for 4 seconds. That's a very simple technique that if you're in a high stress situation, that can be quite helpful. There's many other breathing techniques, and that's helpful if you're, in a stressful situation, or you're nervous about speaking, or, there's a variety of different things that things like that help. But I do, try and be very aware and conscious of trying to manage stress, because it's very easy when you're in a CEO position. I mean, you see everything within the business, the good and the bad, and you can't let it affect you. And it's something that I'm still learning, right? I mean, Enovate's smaller and younger, and we're still growing. There's a lot more issues and problems to be solved, and experiences to have. But you always have to be aware of, how much are you letting impact you emotionally, and how much are you managing. So certainly meditation and breathing are two techniques that I've found that help with that.
That's great. And that kind of takes us into the next topic here. We're talking about stress and habits that we create for ourselves. And now in this whole idea of hybrid work environment, this all comes into play, because, with COVID, as I said before, overnight, everybody was working from home. So talk about hybrid work, how it's kind of changed Enovate, and how you're addressing it and dealing with it as you move forward.
Yeah. So we're currently in a hybrid model at the moment. We're, because a chunk of, sorry, I don't know if you can hear those sirens.
That's all right.
A chunk of what we do is in the field, right? So anyone that's assigned to a field position, if they're a resident engineer, an inspector, nothing really changed for them, right? Because you have to be boots on the ground for that work. But for everyone else, we've created a very flexible environment. My management, it kind of maybe goes along with my management style of being hands-off and, kind of entrusting people to do their job. And so our work from home flex policy is somewhat in that vein. Our office is open for anyone that wants to come to it. We're very lucky, at least in the New Jersey office, that it's big and it's spacious, so it's very COVID safe. So we've had people that come in, but it's also if people are not comfortable coming in, they don't have to. And at the end of the day, it's the question that's asked: are you getting your work done? Are you accountable to your manager? Our managers are great because they're over. We've all had to over communicate during this period of COVID, right? So there's no situation where someone is off working for a few days and nobody actually knows what they're doing and their work might be questioned, right? We just don't have that kind of environment here. Everyone's very accountable. So that's really helped shape the direction we're going to take things moving forward. So we'll maintain a flexible policy. Our, approach to working in the office is going to be hybrid for the people that, their job allows them to do that. There's certain people like, accounting and things like that just have to be in the office for certain things. The job function requires that, but it doesn't need to be every day. So, we did a lot of surveys, and not to, throughout the pandemic, right? Because at the beginning, the answer was one way. And as things went on, people's answers shifted and changed. And so we've listened to what people want and have tried to respond based on that, assuming it works for the business, of course, but it's just, allowed us to maintain this flexibility that I think people like. And productivity is up. It's fed into everyone at the beginning of COVID, and everyone was working from home. And the big question was, oh, what's this going to do to the company culture? We're not around each other, and there's no water cooler chats. And I think if anything, it's really helped us grow our culture within the company of kind of this camaraderie, and like we trust each other and we're all doing our jobs and we're communicating probably more now than we were when, people were sitting across the floor from each other. So, I think you can spin the whole, spin this to like, these are some of the positives that have come out of it. And it's caused us to rethink, right? 3 years ago, it would have been unheard of, the amount of people. You might have one person and they have a special situation that they have to work from home, and now it's the norm because, it was proven that we can all just be as effective working remotely. I don't think 100% remote, at least company-wide, is something that we'll look at. I think you do need those touch points at some point, but it doesn't, I guess the approach we're taking is that it doesn't have to be every person every day. But it's evolving. I mean, we don't have a firm policy in place right now because we're letting it evolve, and it's somewhat happening organically too.
That's great. And I think it will be interesting to see how things evolve as your company grows. I mean, listen, there are benefits to running a small company or working for a small company, and there are benefits of working for a larger company, right? There's benefits to both. And I think that one of the benefits of being small in this regard is managing that hybrid work environment. When you have 25 or 30 people, it can be easier than if you have, of course, 1,000 people. And now all of a sudden you have massive office spaces that are empty, and you're trying to get people to share offices and figuring out how you can schedule people to come in and out certain days of the week. But it sounds like for your situation, you've been very transparent with everybody there the entire time, which can only help situations like this and make sure that people are comfortable in the work environment and allow them to really do the work they love to do. And really, at the end of the day, regardless of size of company or industry, like you said, are people getting their work done? Do they have goals, and are they achieving those goals? Because if they are, then that's what really matters most in any business. And so that kind of leads me into our next question of technology. Obviously, there's different technologies and tools we've been using to work remotely, but in general, technology is so important in the civil engineering industry, whether it's BIM or different survey techniques like LiDAR, and drones keep getting more advanced, and different programs like Civil 3D. How have you at Enovate, how do you keep up with this technology? How do you monitor new technologies and what you should be using? How do you figure out what tools you need to implement and bring into the business? Talk to us about what that process looks like for you.
So, I mean, from the beginning of Enovate, we kind of started off with, we don't want to do things just because that's the way they've always been done, right? So we've been using Teams since the beginning, right? Teams for a lot of companies was a COVID thing and virtual meetings and things like that. That's a very simple example, but everything we've done, we've been paper free since the beginning. Like someone made a joke about how to photocopy the other day because I can't remember the last time I photocopied something. So, as a company, we're kind of we set things off like that, right? Like if we're going to do things, we don't want to use something that's the old way of doing it. It's got to be from this point forward. So that's kind of how we started things off. When it comes to software, a lot of what we do is it's discipline directed, right? So we invest in softwares and technologies just based on what our clients need, what the project needs, and we're not kind of grandfathering things in, right? We're not using an older version of a certain software because we paid for it and we don't want to pay for the latest version. That's kind of not really a philosophy that we would ever follow. But when it comes to from this point forward, I mean, the industry as a whole is moving in that direction. I think COVID forced our industry to really adapt and embrace technology in a way that I think is fantastic. The big, a lot of times I get asked this question even before COVID about, technology and what are you doing? And I think the question I always asked back was, as consultants, as engineers, we're often bound by what our clients require. And if they say you have to use software X, then we have to use software X. So we were somewhat restricted by, the clients that we work for. And if they're super innovative, then, we're going to have that platform for that project. And COVID was great for our clients because it forced them, especially the public agencies, it forced them to have to change how they do things, right? Like their processes, their procedures, the paperwork requirements that you had to submit every month, that's all been forced to change. And they had to figure out how to work from home, and it worked and they were okay with it. And they no longer need to use this 20-year-old software. And so that's how I see the shift happening. And I think that's a great technology shift that happened. It wasn't the engineers that were holding back the expansion into being more technologically advanced. A lot of times when you work in the public sector, especially, a lot of times it was the clients that hold it back.
I totally agree with you, Anya. And, for all the bad things associated with COVID, there's been some real positive things. And I think this is one of them. For years, people have said that civil engineering companies couldn't operate remotely, even half the time. And really overnight, in March of 2020, all civil engineering companies were basically 100% remote, at least for a few weeks until they started to get people back into the office here and there. And like you said, imagine trying to get a public agency to change some of its guidelines or processes, yet we saw that happen quickly with COVID. So there is some value here.
Yeah, it would have been unheard of before COVID.
And I think this is forcing us to use some of these newer technologies. But again, to your point, you really have to think about your client's experience, and you need to be able to deliver your projects and meet your client's expectations and use whatever programs or software you need to do that. That's a really important point. And then obviously from the employee experience, you want them to be able to get their work done productively remotely and make sure that they're hitting their goals and being successful. And so when we think about those two things, the client experience and the employee experience, I think that should really be driving every company's use of technology.
Yeah. And I think one of the issues a lot of civil engineering companies ran into when COVID happened was a lot of what they did was server-based. And that was very problematic with having people work from home. They had to VPN in, things were extremely slow. So, again, those were issues we didn't have. We've been cloud-based since day one. So it was a very seamless process for us when we switched to the work remote. But I think that's what a lot of companies, I know that's what a lot of companies went through, that problematic where they were down for multiple days because their IT companies had to figure out, how to convert things. Public agencies went through the same situation. So I think the more we just continue this shift, and it's just expedited the inevitable that was already happening in our industry.
Yeah, I agree with you. It is happening. So another topic to jump into here a little bit is the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which is a piece of legislation. It's a long time coming. ASCE and other organizations have been lobbying for years for more infrastructure funding, and it's going to bring a lot of funding to our industry. And this funding is going to start to be delivered soon through organizations like the DOTs, if you do transportation work, and through other agencies. And it's going to be rolled out through the different states. So talk to us a little bit about your thoughts on this legislation and how it's going to affect our industry.
I mean, it's going to have huge effects on our industry. We're based in New York and New Jersey, and just if you track where the dollars are going, New York and New Jersey, New York especially, is getting a ton of money, right? So when I think about our industry, it's always follow the money. Where is the money going? I think that we haven't seen anything yet because it's the bill was passed and that's great, but now everything needs to be allocated and the money needs to flow down. And I don't see that happening until probably later this year, more of a Q4 thing where we'll start to see how they figure out how to allocate the money. So it's definitely coming. It's passed, and we've already seen there's a lot of very detailed information. The White House actually this week released a very thorough analysis of exactly where all the money is going. So that's great. That's very helpful for anyone that's interested in really tracking that a little bit more. But it's going to be interesting to see as an industry, how do we deal with this? And I'm less concerned about the civil engineering companies, right? We love taking on more work. The biggest issue is finding people, and we'll figure that issue out, or we can talk about that separately. But I'm also concerned about our clients, especially the public sector clients. As hard as it is for us as private companies to hire people, it's even harder for them. Some of these agencies, I listened to some of them speak last week, they have, 15, 20% vacancy rates. And so what does that mean when all of a sudden they're given billions of dollars that needs to be put on the street in procurements and RFPs and RFQs? Are they going to be able to handle that? Are they going to be able to get the money out as quickly as it goes? So, and I know that they're aware of it. I know they've, a lot of the agencies, senior level people are having those conversations. It's how are they going to manage the influx of work? So I think that's something that as engineers, we should also be paying attention to. It's not just doing the work, it's making sure that, it gets put out in the right way. But I mean, look, as I see it, this is what we've been waiting for, as you said, many years, right? It's been for the last two administrations, they've been talking about this infrastructure bill and the effects it can have and what it can mean. And so, now it's finally coming. And as civil engineers, I mean, the bulk of the work is coming, and the bulk of the money rather is coming to our industry. So, we do a lot of heavy civil work, roads, highways, bridges, transit, and, tracking that money. We know that there's a ton of it that's going to come. So it's I'm very optimistic about it. I'm very optimistic about what's coming down the line, but we also need to start planning of how do we handle that? There's going to be a lot of work, and positioning yourselves now and planning for it, and how do you adapt for it? How do you ramp up for it? How do you start having conversations now? We do a lot of partnering and sub-consulting. And so we're having a lot of those discussions now as you kind of see where the money is going to be going, some of the larger programs, the gateways, things like that. But I think for our industry, it's a fantastic opportunity. There's going to be a ton of work. I think, we've already seen, hiring right now is extremely difficult, and it's not going to get easy anytime soon. One of the effects we're seeing is that salaries are going up, right? I mean, people are, salaries are higher than they've been in a long time, which is great. As I think about that, like maybe as civil engineers, we're finally starting to make the money that civil engineers should be making. A lawyer can walk in a room and charge hundreds of dollars an hour and not really do anything, and here we are as civil engineers stamping things.
Right.
So maybe it's just bringing us up in line with where civil engineers need to be. But then that can have ripple effects, right? I mean, you look at people that are in college or considering what they want to do in college, and they're looking at professions, and they're looking at how much money they can make, and they're looking at this variety of different things. And so much is going to happen for our industry over the next 10 years. And I think it's going to make it, if we position it well, it can make it very attractive for kind of some of the younger people that are considering what careers to go down.
That's a great point. Something we really need to focus on, because we need more civil engineers. And this is an opportunity to show them what's available to them. I mean, you made a great point about those agencies. And I think that that's something we do need to be aware of, because if I'm a civil engineer today in my 20s or 30s or even 40s, and I'm trying to think about my career going forward, and I see all these private firms that are doing extremely well, they can offer me great salaries, really good benefit packages, and I can either work for one of them or go to a public agency where there are some perks and benefits, but you're probably not going to be making the same type of money that you're making in private industry. So to your point, if they need more people to administer these funds and they can't get them, that could be a bit of a problem in terms of the supply chain there. So that's something we're really going to have to keep our eyes on. And again, to your point, you really have to look at every aspect of this legislation and how it's going to flow down, right? How is the money going to get there? And we'll talk about that in a few minutes in terms of hiring and, kind of the challenges going on with that. But the last thing that I want to ask you about here in this first batch of questions is diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's a huge thing today, and it should be a huge thing today. It's a big thing in the civil engineering industry for sure. Talk a little bit about what it means to you and how Enovate encourages and supports DEI initiatives.
Yeah. So, I mean, DEI is huge for us, and it has been. We have an internal DEI committee. It's made up of employees. I'm not on the committee. That's by design. It's something that's employee driven. And they're very active, and it's very inspiring to see some of the initiatives that they want to put in place and that they're talking about. And it's really the engagement from employees has been fantastic. And that's something that as a leader I recognize, like this is something that's very important to employees. So that's kind of just seeing that it's very nice to see. But DE&I, it's I heard this analogy recently about someone who was describing diversity and inclusion, and diversity is being asked to the ball and inclusion is getting asked to dance, right? So we have to look at it in both of those together, right? That's why the program is both of those. So it's not just about increasing your numbers and statistics, whether it's people of color, women, LGBTQ, whatever you kind of consider to be in that diversity bucket. But it's also, are they truly included in the company? Do they see themselves in how the company operates, or do they feel like a little bit of an outsider? So the initiatives that we have, we're always conscious of that. So, as a leader, I mentioned earlier, I'm metrics driven, right? So we're always kind of looking at the numbers, but not just on the front end, right? Are people given the across the board, right? Are people given fair opportunities? Are pay scales comparable across the board? We're constantly looking at things like that. Are they given opportunities for leadership? Are they given opportunities for the projects that might be seen as more kind of high profile projects? So we're constantly thinking about that. We're constantly talking about that. But the committee has been a big driver of what we're doing within the company. And it's been great. I mean, they've made some fantastic suggestions. They've made some really good ground, and they're pointing things out that we need to change as a company and we need to do better. But it's just having that kind of engagement. I think that's very important. DE&I is something that's company wide, and it shouldn't be something that's top down. It should be something that's ingrained within the organization. So that's how we've been trying to approach it.
That's great. And I think we do need more diversity in leadership in the world of civil engineering. But in order to get that, we need to hire people, and we need to hire a more diverse population at younger ages in the company.
Yeah.
And for that to happen, they need to be available, meaning that we need to get out there and we need to get in front of kids that are in underserved communities, and we need to make them aware of civil engineering and bring them into our profession. So it's not a simple solution here.
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
I mean, it is really systemic to the point that we need people available to hire. And to your point, which I think is a very important one, is it cannot be a check the box item for your company.
No.
It has to be something where the metrics aren't going to tell you everything. It's about how different perspectives and cultures are running throughout your company, because there's a lot of value in that. And we'll make the civil engineering industry just a more rich and satisfying environment to work in when we can have people of different perspectives throughout our companies. So I'm glad to hear that your employees are involved in this.
Yeah.
And that you're allowing them to really get involved and kind of drive these initiatives using these committees, because it does seem like a really great way to make sure that there's buy-in from everybody within the company and they're contributing to DEI initiatives. Yeah.
And it's not just something that like, okay, we have this program and this is what it is, right? It's something that it's employee grown, and a lot of great suggestions have come out of it. Even things as simple as we've switched up our holiday approach. So we have a number of holidays that are now floating to give people flexibility if they want to celebrate, certain days that might not be part of kind of the national list of holidays, for example. And just having that kind of recognition that, listen, we have a very diverse group of people here, and how do we kind of recognize and include all of that in how we're operating as a company. Awesome. But it's also something that is ongoing, right? There's you're never done. You're never done. And it's always something that's going to be evolving, and we'll adapt. And especially as we grow, there's what we're doing now will be different than what we're doing in a couple of years from now.
Yeah. And I really feel like that's applicable to everything we've talked about so far. I feel like with diversity and inclusion, the technology changes, the infrastructure funding process that's going to be ever evolving. So it seems like it's something that's really going on right now everywhere. You need to adapt. So let's switch gears here a little bit. I'm going to throw a couple of questions at you that I often get from civil engineers that are developing in their careers. And the first one is, what is the number one trait that you feel civil engineering professionals should possess today?
Being comfortable with change. And being able to, and I really mean that. I think if you want to advance in your career, you have to be okay with change. You have to be able to adapt. And, I'm not talking about change career or profession or anything like that, but, just like that, sometimes you have to drop the thing you're working on and focus on something else. And the people that are really good at that, I've seen those are the ones that tend to get to leadership positions much sooner than others who struggle. And there's always, you can kind of see, if people that like, oh my God, I've been working on this thing for so long, and you're telling me that I have to drop it now and do something else, and it's uncomfortable. But just by nature of our industry is getting faster and faster, and you're going to get passed out by people that are really good at adapting to change. And whether it's changing the role that you're doing, changing the technology you're using, changing the project you're working on. But I think now more than ever, we're seeing a lot more of that.
Yeah, for sure. No doubt about that. All right. Next question here. How can I make sure that I'm adding value to my organization?
So I think first thing is really understanding what is your part in the organization. And that doesn't just mean that you're the designer for X, right? Your part is so much more than that. So it's really understanding the part. And so as an example, let's say you're working on a project and your job is to do the drainage design, right? That's just understanding kind of your function on the project. But I think as an engineer, you can add more value if you understand what is the bigger picture here. So is this a strategic client? Are we trying to get more work with them? Is it a client that we've had for a long time and they're one of our best clients and we want to make sure we're keeping them happy? Is the type of work we're doing something that's strategic to the company? Is the industry strategic? Who are the players? So understanding kind of the more about like not just the job you're doing, but kind of the reason behind it and the strategy behind it. I think that can be really helpful for you as a civil engineer because it lets you start to see the bigger picture than just the day-to-day of what you're doing. And I think the more engaged and you can, or the more you can kind of understand that, then the more engaged you can be in it. And then that kind of leads to further conversations with your management, with your leadership, and you can see how you can potentially, help that process.
That's great. And I absolutely agree with you. You have to understand what's expected of you in order to meet the expectations and be successful. So you really have to be clear about that. All right, here's another one for you. What is the one business challenge that I can solve that would make the single biggest impact on my company? And you can answer this for Enovate, like if someone in the company was asking you that there, or just generally speaking in the industry. What would you like to see get easier?
If I look back at any project I've ever worked on that had a problem or an issue, whether it was litigious or, or anything I've kind of observed, whether, anything that ever goes wrong on a project, 99% of the time, it's because of poor communication. If someone just picked up the phone, if someone just walked across the room, if we dropped our egos and just had a conversation, 99% of those problems could have been solved long before they ever became problems. So, I think as an industry, recognizing that and how do we change that, right? Because, engineers are very good at what engineers do, right? It's a very, it's a very talented profession, very well-educated profession. But sometimes that means, there's egos that come with that, both good and bad. And so I think it's just recognizing that 99% of the problems that occur in construction, in engineering, can be fixed with communication in life. Yeah. So if we could probably solve, we could, world peace if we figure that one out.
Yeah, that's a great point. And if you're listening and you're thinking about this and you really want to drive value in your organization, you could obviously start by improving your own communication skills.
Yeah.
So you can do that, but you can also think about ways that you can improve team communication, whether it's a new technology tool or a process, maybe having a better kickoff meeting at the beginning of your projects. If you really want to add value to your organization, think about how miscommunication can be minimized.
Yeah. And if you see yourself in a situation where they're not doing what I asked them to do, right? But I hear people say that quite a lot. And then, so there's that right there, you said it. So why are they not doing what you asked them to do? Are they just being jerks and they're not doing it to tick you off, or are they not understanding it? Do they need to be communicated with a little bit differently? So I think sometimes taking a step back and realizing like better communication is probably the answer here.
Yeah, for sure. No doubt about that. All right. Last question here in this segment. What are you most afraid about regarding the future of our industry? Is there something that you're worried about? I know that there's a lot of good things going on right now, but I'm sure as a CEO, you need to think about risk exposure. So talk to us about what's worrying you.
Yeah, I think so. There's a lot of things going on right now. Are we going to attract the people that need to come to our industry? That's always a question that we have. And as you said before, it's not something that's easily tackled. It starts, it's got to start very young because by the time people are in college, they've already decided whether or not they're going to get into our field. So it's got to start earlier than that. Our industry it's not one of those industries that things can become more and more automated, so we need less people. I mean, that doesn't work as well for engineering. You still need an engineer's mind on much of what we're doing. So that's something I'm always conscious of, always aware of. But I think I'm actually probably more optimistic about engineering than I have been for a very long time. I think all of the changes that are coming in, innovation, adaptation, it's fantastic for engineers. And what we're starting to see for the first time is, historically, if you were an engineer, you just did engineering work. And if you were, someone who worked in, if you were a software programmer, you just did that. If you were, all these professions. And now here we are, because of innovation, we're all kind of coming together, right? So it's not uncommon for a project to have not just all the engineering disciplines, but you're also going to have some software people ingrained in that project. You're going to have some finance people ingrained in that project. And so you're kind of having this very interesting mesh of all these professions with engineering that hasn't really happened before. And I think it's great for engineering because it gives engineering a lot more exposure, both ways, right? People are exposed more to engineering, but then engineering is also exposed more to the business side of things and the software side of things and all the things that were outside of our realm in the past. So, that's how I think about things, and how are we going to adapt to that? Which goes back to the point I made about, being open to change and adapting to that. I think our industry is very much going in that direction. And, are we going to be comfortable with it?
Absolutely. There is a lot of adapting and flexibility that needs to happen. All right. So one last question for you here, which is more focused around yourself. How do you decide what to work on every day when you come to work, Aine? Just thinking about it from a productivity standpoint and from a planning standpoint, someone in your seat has a lot of things that you're juggling. So what does that process look like for you each day?
So I start my day out with, I tend to make myself a list, right? I'm kind of very, maybe this is the engineer in me, but I'm very list and goal driven. So, and I make a new one every day, even if it's all the same stuff that I had yesterday, because it just kind of gets my mind shifted to thinking about the priorities of today. But by nature of the position, that list is a great target, but it doesn't always happen because just by nature of the position, you get a phone call and you need to drop some things that you're doing and handle that. Something happens and a client needs you to go meet them for something. So figuring out how to juggle that and what is, what's kind of priority and needs to be dealt with now and what's not. And so I'm kind of always assessing those situations, right? Because otherwise I just spend my day on the phone and putting out, answering questions. So I'm always kind of trying to make I'm always trying to plan my day and what I do based on, is it urgent and is it important? Then I deal with it today. But if it doesn't fit in both of those categories, I can either delegate it or I can do it kind of later when I have a bit more downtime. So assessing what needs to be done today versus what can be put on the back burner. And that's helped me be a bit more productive in what I am accomplishing. It allows me to set aside more time for thinking about strategy and growth and planning and partnering and teaming and all the things that I feel are important to grow in the business.
Well, that was great. Thank you for sharing that. And thank you for spending some time with us on the Civil Engineering CEO. Once again, Aine O'Dwyer, Principal and CEO of Enovate Engineering. Thank you, Aine.
Yeah, thank you. It's good to be back again and hope to speak to you again soon.
I hope you enjoyed our conversation this week on the Civil Engineering CEO. We put out videos like this weekly to help engineers become better managers and leaders. So please click the subscribe button here so you don't miss any of our videos, and I'll see you next week.